When the Belgians came here to southern Door County and to the larger Green Bay area, that combination of, a chicken soup, a community event, because of course as a Belgian, in the early days of immigration here, they would have been in a Belgian enclave. So the community sense of being together and celebrating something together, maybe raising money for one of their parishes, and the Kermiss, those things all came together.
Booyah was almost a staple. Usually though, it was made in the fall when the harvest season was coming to an end, and they used everything they had left in the gardens, and the older chickens that weren't laying anymore, they would go into the booyah pot. So it was a mixture of all vegetables and chicken, and it was a hearty soup. At that time, there weren't many social events, but everybody waited for the Kermiss, and it was usually a 2-day event.
It's something that to me is part of the powerful meaning of Booyah. It harks back to, it recalls, and in a way acknowledges or gives a nod to how interdependent we are, how important it is for us to strengthen our bonds, and we strengthen them through making and eating Booyah.
Booyah is a traditional Belgian food. Through my lifetime and previous generations, it's a very common dish at any Belgian event.
We had Booyah at most of the large family gatherings because it was something that could be made ahead. You could prepare all the ingredients, and then you could have a large kettle of soup that could stay warm essentially all day and be ready as people filtered in and out. Maybe they were going to different events, even if they were doing a lot of farm work.
When my grandmother was making it, and my mother, and the people around here, they didn't give it a name. They just said, soup. We're gonna have soup.
We had beef stew because our ancestors would salt the beef. That was a big thing. And then at the Kermiss, they would take all of this beef and they make beef stew. And that was that tradition that they carried on. Mom didn't have Booyah, but we always had beef stew.
We tell everybody within 20 miles of Green Bay, people don't know what it is. And even people in Green Bay right to this day, coming in all the time, and they've been living here all their lives. They don't know what Booyah is.
I was introduced to Booyah at our local church picnics. It was always one of the main fundraisers for the church picnic, and I was just always interested in how that happened, and when I was asked to help, I was glad to learn, and always a big part of making the Booyah then after that. Once you get a job in the church, you don't lose that job until you walk away or you pass away.
Booyah is such an interesting foodway to me because we don't really know its origins. And I'm pretty convinced that it's like a little bit like chili. There was no invention of it, that it evolved from various traditions, from various locations. If you look at it in the broadest sense, I think, at least in the United States, and you talk about the word Booyah, you find it in places other than Belgian settlements and other than the Green Bay, larger Green Bay, lower Door County area. You find it in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, and also more rural areas. These various one-pot, large group event boiled meals that draw from the food, the ingredients, whether it's wild or grown or both, from around them.
When we advertise, it's Booyah. When people ask you, when is your Booyah? Well, it's at the Kermiss. So yeah, it's the main food. It's what it is, and everybody knows. Oh yeah, it's the Belgians.
And I remember my great-grandma and my grandmother both, and I still do it to this day, and I know some of my aunts and cousins do the same. They can the Booyah, so you have all your mason jars or ball jars out, you fill them with the soup and run them through the canner, and you can enjoy that fresh Booyah taste all year long. We had another grandmother that we always joked the closest that the chicken ever got to her soup was when the chicken flew over the pot.
One of the things that jazzes me, if you will, about Booyah is the aspects of it as a folkloric tradition. which is just kind of a fancy way for saying the specifics of how each cook or family group or booyah maker in a parish, the particulars of it, which can be so different and yet so similar.
Our event starts at 11 a.m., so the process of booyah making starts about 5:30.
We start at 4 in the morning. Now they start earlier than that. So it takes about 5 hours to cook a kettle, so we wanted to have it done by 10 o'clock, so we'd start at 4 in the morning.
I showed up about 6. Kevin started everything, obviously. Jerry and I then took, from that point, started adding the other items to the original boiling of the water. So
Ryan, bring a spoon,
added the chicken, the broth base, and then from that point, then it's a timed event of different items.
Chicken and all the different vegetables and not too many spices. Belgians weren't known to use too many spices. One spice they did use, which they don't use in booyah, but one spice they used a lot was nutmeg, like in the jut, and different, when you use pork, they used a lot of nutmeg.
If they were butchering beef or pork, that also made its way into the kermis soup. They used what they had. The Belgians were not wasteful people, they were thrifty, and they were willing to use whatever was available. So whatever garden vegetables happened to be in season went into the kermis soup.
First of all, you cook your chicken. Cook your chicken, get all the bones out, because you're always afraid of people choking on it. And then you put your chicken, and you keep the broth, of course, and you always add oxtails or beef bones. That's got to be part of it. And then I don't make mine with tomato soup. Now they do here, but we put celery, onions, potatoes, even leek, whatever, like I said, whatever they had in their greens and that. And I didn't put vegetables like corn in that.
We do use beef bones, soup bones, and we mix bone marrow back in there, so it's bone marrow. Just talking to some people about they sell you all these collagen supplements on TV, and they say, well, nobody makes soup with bones anymore. Well, we do.
So many pounds of cabbage in each container, and then we start by cooking with, with water, cabbage, and onions go in to begin with. And then we follow that up with beef, and then chicken, and then carrots, celery, and potatoes. And we put some diced tomatoes in there, and some peas. And then we got another couple of secret ingredients, little spice and another thing that we put in, and that's our booyah.
We make boneless booyah now. Years ago, it was always with the bones, and one batch had 100 pounds of chicken in it, but with the bones. But now we put, I think, 70 pounds.
When we made it back in the early years, the whole chicken was just cut up, bone and all, and made that way. And so when you were having a bowl of booyah, you always had to watch for the bones.
It's a lot easier, boneless. We use chicken thighs, all thighs.
I think it's the making of the booyah that is so core, because it's so labor intensive. And it takes so many people. It takes this amazing organization of tasks, especially when you're doing these 60-gallon batches times how many.
We make about 80 gallons, so it's a large volume of booyah, of product, and it takes a lot of time to cook that volume of food. So it starts with boiling the chicken and breaking down the chicken and getting the chicken cooked through to get it to break down.
Approximately 4 hours for full cook time from the start of the water boiling to the point you're ready to serve.
You have to make a large kettle of booyah. You can't just make a small kettle. It's just like when you make Belgian pies. You can't make 1 or 2 Belgian pies. You have to make at least a dozen at a time, at least, It isn't something you're going to go through, because it's a long process.
If somebody in your family likes more beef in it, then you put more beef. If they don't like more chicken, you do. I guess that's what all the ladies did. Some people don't like a lot of onions in. Oh, well, we'll cut that, But I really think you need onions in there. It's the base.
it's important to have somebody stirring it so it doesn't scorch. We had big wooden paddles, and you stir it from the bottom and keep it stirred every, to go around stirring all the kettles every 5 minutes probably, stir the kettles.
When we're making booyah, the pallet, of course, comes off. And we have a bed of sand that the kettle itself, that the jacket goes on. And then inside of every jacket is a cast iron kettle, is where the booyah is actually cooked. And then there's a bed of sand underneath these jackets, and then the wood goes in here. We feed the wood in here and cook the booyah. And then of course, booyah is all about stirring it a lot. You have, to make booyah, you cook it slow and stir it a lot. And so this is, you're constantly stirring it. And then when it's all done, we have these dippers, and the booyah is removed from the cast iron kettle and put into a serving kettle, and then served to the public.
These various one-pot, large group event boiled meals that draw from the food, the ingredients, whether it's wild or grown or both, from around them. So the hypothesis there is that the style of booyah, the concept of booyah, may even come from a French word or a Walloon Belgian word, some people say, that means either to boil or means soup or something like bouilla base, which of course is a French dish.
They started in Green Bay. St. Peter and Paul, I think, started with the Rentmeesters.
Andrew Rentmeester started it, but I don't think he made booyah, but Albert Allen made the booyah. He was the first cook.
And the story that goes with the bouillon recipe talks about how Rentmeester in 1906 or 7 had been hired as a teacher. I think it was the Finger Road School. He suggested that year that they make some money, have a fundraiser for school supplies by doing a soup that his mother made. But when he was interviewed by the newspaper and asked how to spell the soup, he didn't know how to spell it. So he said B-O-O-Y-A-H, because that was what it sounded like to him. That was bouillon from there on in. But obviously that pronunciation and the spelling has changed, and in different areas means different kinds of ingredients. But it's this large, many vegetables, many ingredients, kind of an everything but the kitchen sink sort of concoction. And I say concoction because some people call it a soup and some people call it a stew, and I call it somewhere in between. What about the Belgian connection in southern Door County and the Green Bay area? Well, they also ate chicken soup. Very different than what we think of as chicken bouillon. And we can't find, I've not been able to find, I've looked all my life in Belgian cookbooks to see if there's anything that's called bouillon and it sounds and looks like and eats like one of the bouillon events, and there isn't anything that I found, and I don't know of anybody who has. They certainly did eat chicken soup, but it was much different. But what they did have was the Kermiss. The Kermiss is an annual harvest celebration connected particularly to Catholic parishes. And so this was a perfect time or perfect setting to have a bouillon, to eat bouillon, was because it was harvest time. All these vegetables would go into it. At some point, these churches also started to have fundraisers, and bouillon was a perfect meal for church picnic fundraisers. So there's a sort of a Belgian, Walloon, Flemish connection there. So the connections come from different places. There is not a Belgian connection that we can find in some of these other places. There are fish bouillons up on the northern shores of Lake Michigan. There is a chicken bouillon that looks a lot like our chicken bouillon in the Catholic parishes of St. Paul, Minnesota, but they're not Belgian.
Bouillon is very popular at family gatherings, different events. Certainly the Kermiss celebration that we're having here today, which Kermisses are celebrated typically in the fall of the year. Many different local communities have their own celebrations, Kermiss celebrations, are the Namur Belgian Heritage Center happens to be on this weekend. But for the next month, there'll be multiple Kermisses taking place in Southern Door County, in Kewaunee County. They all will be serving Booyah. So Booyah is more traditional for events, but it's certainly family gatherings and at any time.
There are numerous kermisses all the way into October. Almost one every weekend in different little villages here in the area.
We never call it a kermis, but we just had the church picnic. It's similar to a kermis probably, but we didn't call it a kermis.
When I think about the Belgian food customs that I grew up with in Green Bay, which is where I grew up, I think of Belgian pies, those wonderful bread dough or sweet bread dough based pies that have some kind of a custardy, cheesy center and fruit in the very middle of it.
Belgian trip, which is very popular in the area of northeast Wisconsin. Really, it's a bratwurst on steroids. It has cooked cabbage introduced to the bratwurst, which is called Belgian trip.
Everybody, Belgians, and I don't care if you were in Thierry Deems or wherever you were, but jut it's a cabbage dish. And of course, they had pigs, so the bacon. You'd put bacon fat with the cabbage, and man, very good.
The heart and soul of it is the same base of a chicken soup that we all love, but they made it in their own kettles. So if you were making it at your house and somebody else was making it at theirs, they were going to use their own kettle. Some were cast iron over a fire, some were a stainless or a heavy kitchen pot, some were round, and some had just the typical flat bottom. But everybody had their own kettle. They were seasoned from years of use and lots of booyah making. Being over a fire, I think that gave it a special and unique flavor.
Cast iron kettle. That's huge. I've made it in aluminum, I've made it in stainless. Even the kettle I'm using now, I used to just cook chicken and transfer it to my big one. Until I started making it for about a month in this kettle and finally the flavors started coming together. Gets seasoned well and everything. But cast irons, from my opinion, everybody makes their own way. Everybody has their own recipe. That's one thing people say, well, that's not booyah if you don't do this, that. It's whatever you have, you throw in a kettle, you make it how you like it. Well, the kettle started last night, so I put when I got done this morning, I pulled the chicken out. Cabbage, celery, onions go in, they'll cook those for about 2 hours solid. Then they have carrots and potatoes. Once those are done, I throw everything in and just let it simmer now for a couple hours at least. So I'll start cooling it down here shortly. But there's no whole tomatoes in it, but there's 2 different tomato products in there. But again, we try to get everything for more flavor, seasoning. There's not a whole lot of seasoning actually itself. There's only 3 seasonings in it. So we go through I think we guess how many tons. We go through about averaging 6,500 pounds of chicken a year. Every batch, 40-pound batch, has 20 pounds of potatoes, 10 pounds of carrots. I don't know how many pounds of cabbage, 10 pounds of cabbage. We get a lot of cabbage from Black Creek right now, the big giant head, so that's nice.
I have a good friend that has about a 25 gallon stainless steel booyah cooker, and it works terrific. It's a beautiful cleanup, Cast iron is a little more tougher to clean than the stainless steel.
You need cast iron to make good booyah, and you need a wood fire to make good booyah. And the bottoms have to be round so that you don't scorch the booyah. It's easy to stir and easy to clean. Some people make them with a flat bottom, but those don't work out good. It should be a 1/4 inch thick cast iron kettle.
In 1984, my brother-in-law, Jerry Ulmer, brought to a family reunion in Westfield, Wisconsin. And it was an old barrel, and he found a tub that fit right into it and built a stack off the back and then cut an opening for the airflow. This thing looked just like it was gonna fall over, but it made good booyah.
We use stainless steel and aluminum containers. Historically, generations back, cooked in more of a traditional cast iron container because that is what they had. More recent generations, people believe in cooking in those cast iron containers, pots. So many of what you'll see at even some festivals now are cast iron pots sitting inside of 55-gallon drums, either wood-fired or the use of propane heat, some other type of gas form. But we don't use that method. It's cast iron pots are difficult to find now that were more common years ago. And when you cook a batch of 80 gallons, we're looking for a little more of a convenience of getting the booyah ready.
I think when you have it over a wood fire, you get that smoky flavor that kind of is rolling over it all the time and just gives you a little extra of the olden days wood smoke taste.
We'll make 400 gallons of booyah, which turns out to be 3,200 bowls of booyah. And the people that come early to purchase booyah, they'll usually buy it in quantities. So, you know, like 6, 8, 10, 20 bowls at a time, and we'll send that out. They'll either come with their containers, or we use ice cream buckets for them to take the booyah in 6 bowls at a time in an ice cream bucket.
70 gallons in the 80, so if we do 3, generally if we do 3, that's 210 gallons. That's plenty of booyah. That's a lot of booyah to sell. I mean, in today's world it is.
Each of our batches is 50 gallons is a batch. So some kettles take a batch and a half, and we don't have big enough kettles for 2 batches, but some only take a half a batch. But when we say 12 kettles, that's 12 batches, you know, they go, that's 50 gallon, each batch is 50 gallons.
Although I think it's kind of growing, it's a Green Bay thing, but there's so much booyah available. I mean, they can go down to the farmer's market and, you know, and there's a guy, I believe he calls himself the Booyah Shed or something. I think he's a business that's 7 days a week.
St. Peter and Paul, they'll do 300 gallons. I believe they have a booyah club there. You can rent kettles and everything. And people line up by 1 o'clock, they're gone. It's all gone. Best we ever did is we had our 90-gallon kettle full and we sold it out in 90 minutes once. But definitely, like, they'll have people lined up for, you know, a block or 2 with kettles in their hands.
There was a time in this neighborhood where you could sell 6 or 7 kettles easy, but those days are gone. You know, the younger people, I don't think, relate to booyah like the older people do.
The older generation really got more into it than I think the younger generation.
Yeah, they're much more, you know, booyah to them is a tradition.
Yeah.
You know, and they come looking for it. I mean, years ago in this neighborhood, if we made booyah, the smell of the booyah in the air would bring them out. But now we have to actually advertise that we're doing it.
Belgians came here to this particular area and stuck together and ate the same foods and helped each other and got each other through those tough times. And I think that plays out in booyah. I do. I mean, it's labor intensive. It's everybody, you know, working together, everybody helping each other, everybody sitting down at the same table and eating together. So it's something that to me is part of the powerful meaning of booyah. It harks back to, it recalls, and in a way acknowledges or gives a nod to how interdependent we are, how important it is for us to strengthen our bonds, and we strengthen them through making and eating booyah.